Sup everyone, we're back for more Beric Saga, and this time we're doing another side quest. If last video's side quest was all about Sherlock, this one is about a new unit called Thaddy. Thaddy is a burglar, which is basically what the fan translator of this game called male thieves in order to distinguish them from Zine's class, because Zine is capable of promoting and Thaddy isn't. Anyway, what we want to do in our preparations here is firstly we're going to inactivate Sherlock to make room for hiring Laurentia. Now, Laurentia is the first flyer in the game, and because of that you can tell that if I'm hiring her, there's probably some sort of terrain that I want her to fly over. And that's definitely going to be the case here. Now, the next thing I do actually is head into the atelier and buy an opal from the shop here. And the reason I do that is that I want to get Lumiere the alchemist to make me a blizzard orb. This doesn't have any particular purpose for me in terms of turn count, but what it does have is a particularly high injury rate of 30. That means that if I want to incorporate capturing specific enemies in future strategies, I have a significantly more reliable method of doing so than relying on the harpoon, or heaven forbid, Arthur's flourish. Anyway, that covers my preparation work. Let's move on to the actual map. The objective that we have to achieve is to have Thaddy reach a building which the boss of the map is sitting on. After that, everyone has to escape. So, in this chapter I'm going to be deploying the usual squad of experienced targets, in addition to a couple of mounted units who are going to be clearing the way ahead of Thaddy and making sure he can move unobstructed towards his goal. There are two potential paths from the starting point that we can take to reach the seize point, and one of those is to cross the river immediately to the north and walk past the Imperial troops who are sitting there. This is extremely dangerous because the Imperials are far stronger than the bandits that we otherwise fight, and there are a couple of particularly annoying ones who I'll discuss later. So the way that we are going to go is to head directly west from the starting point along the south of the river, and then have Laurentia fly over to lower the bridge for my infantry units. I actually end up having a spectacularly bad first turn here. Leon managed to break his iron spear, and then Dean is getting whacked twice in a row by this enemy bow user. And I also managed to miss several easy kills on my experienced targets. I don't remember why I decided to carry on with this particular run after that, but it does serve to demonstrate that even when a lot of RNG goes badly, it is still possible to recover and still achieve a low turn count. Another really annoying thing that happens on this turn is about to happen, and that is that Leon gets hit with a poison arrow. So we get to see the poison status in action for the first time after I mentioned it back in chapter 3. The RNG involved in determining how much of his HP is lost to poison actually turns Leon from a combat threat into kind of a liability for the remainder of this map. You'll see that he goes down to pretty low HP at several points, and while he's poisoned, I can't let him sit at low HP for fear that he will just die at the start of the next turn. In other words, I'm essentially down a unit for this map after turn 1, which makes it a bit more difficult. There's an enemy over near the boss who just used the battle cry skill, and I've had trouble with battle cry before, but this guy is not going to be anywhere near as troublesome as previous instances, because he's a pickpocket, and that means that he uses knives, which ignore most of his strength and have low might. So Battlecry is not going to make him a combat threat. Unlike Laurentia, who is remarkably strong in combat thanks to her Euthyphro spear. This is a magical spear, and that means she's always going to have that little bit of extra damage against most enemies, because very few enemies have particularly high resilience in this game. Okay, with our tactical considerations covered, let's talk about the Imperial troops who I am studiously avoiding. If you get into any of their movement range, they will start moving to attack you, and they are much stronger than the bandits, as I mentioned, but there are two enemy Imperials in particular who are worth commenting on. Firstly, there's the Ballistician. He's not a particularly huge threat, apart from his range, but I do want to note here that Ballisticians in this game appear to have some sort of directionality involved in their range. I noticed this while working through Chapter 5's main mission. When you click on a ballista, its range is only within a specific arc, not all the way around it. So I think that's a pretty interesting mechanic for Kaga to throw in here. The other enemy of note is the Ray's Priest, because he has an orb called Wormwood. The thing about Wormwood is that it is effectively this game's iteration of a siege tome. However, unlike siege tomes, which usually only have 3 to 10 range, Wormwood can attack any unit anywhere on the map. And that means that dealing with the remaining enemies with the Wormwood guy actively trying to attack me would be very, very risky, and I just have to take into account an extra variable every turn. Wormwood itself is not capable of reducing a unit below 1 HP, but it does make it much easier for other enemy attacks to finish off my units. So yeah, just keeping away from that is the best strategy here. At this stage, my mounted units have rushed ahead in an attempt to clear out the enemies near the bridge, while my experienced targets are waiting behind and tidying up the remaining enemies there. Unfortunately, because of the reasons I mentioned earlier, Leon is forced to hang back for a while and then use a vulnerary rather than attacking. And that dramatically reduces my army's offensive power, because as you know, Leon is exceptionally strong in that regard. The other thing about Leon here is that I forgot to equip a new weapon on him, and that means he's going to be unarmed for the remainder of this turn. I am so used to Fire Emblem, where the game automatically equips the next weapon down if one of your weapons breaks, and this is just something that I guess I'm going to have to get used to. Fortunately, I believe he still has a shield equipped, so that's something at least. In order to enter the house and lower the bridge, Laurentia has to dismount first. But because she is so far ahead of my infantry units, that doesn't end up mattering to Thaddy. If I had tried to use Axel on this map, I think it would have been much more difficult, because Axel has the same movement as Thaddy and would be only one tile ahead, and I don't think he has enough movement to cross the river and enter the building in a single move, which means Thaddy would lose tiles if I used Axel, and that is why I chose Laurentia instead. Now, an enemy whom Faye was trying to kill moves away and uses a vulnerary, but that's okay because he's going to come back and attack her and get a critical to the face on the next turn. Now, one thing that characterizes this entire run is that I feel my inputs have been particularly sloppy. You just saw me accidentally bring up the map conditions here. So yeah, sorry about that. I probably should have reset and tried to do this a bit more cleanly. But this is what I ended up with, so yeah. So let's talk about our final division of units, because my units are going to split up on this turn. Obviously I am sending my powerful infantry units across the bridge, because Faramir and Vola are going to be necessary to deal with the boss on his house. And obviously Thaddy has to go up there too, because he needs to seize. But what might be surprising is that Ruby is also going to be crossing the bridge. She is a strange choice because in order for her to get to the upper escape point, she has to dismount in order to walk up the cliff, and that's going to make her movement very tight. but sending her up there means that she gets an extra kill, and so that's how it shakes out. This enemy ruffian, who for some reason has boss music, rushes over and tries to shoot Larentia down with his bow. But this is not as scary as you would think if you are familiar with Fire Emblem, because unlike in pretty much every Fire Emblem game ever, bows do not deal any sort of bonus damage to flyers in this game. So Larentia is completely safe, and I'm going to be making use of that again in a later map. Leon gets whacked right down to 1 HP here, so he is once again back to being a complete liability on this next turn. And I can't be bothered sparing another vulnerary to heal him up, so there we go. Leon being unavailable also means that I'm going to be hesitating a lot through the next few actions as I think about what I want to do, so sorry about that. Here we see Faye get the critical hit that I mentioned earlier and just completely obliterate this guy who thought he was safe after using a vulnerary, but it turns out not so much. I move Ruby up here without attacking, but I probably should have used the slim sword to try and get some sword rank, as I still would have been able to Kanto up most likely. Because this guy has an axe, and of course Ruby's Axebane makes him extremely unlikely to hit her. Faramir attacks the ruffian here, but he is not quite strong enough to one-hit KO him from where he is, so we're going to have to finish him off next turn, which is good because Faramir does not need the experience, and someone like Ruby does. Where Faramir is also means that he pulls out the battle cry pickpocket, and as you can see, he gives basically zero craps about the amount of damage that the pickpocket is able to put out. And Leon is the final unit to act in this turn. I have him attack here, which is pretty risky, because I honestly was expecting to reset due to all of the errors I had made in my inputs. But clearly that didn't end up happening, as we are now at the turn 5 save. And said turn 5 save allows me to feed the ruffian into Ruby reliably, because she is pretty bad at hitting that guy. Come turn 5, reinforcements start to spawn around the lower escape tile, and that is going to give my training squad something to do while the rest of my units are dealing with the main objective. On the other hand, it is somewhat challenging to deal with them thanks to Leon having only 1 HP at the moment, so we're going to have to take measures to keep him safe. Meanwhile, Ruby is heading north and she has to use pretty much her entire movement on every turn, and that includes not getting put to sleep by the sleep arrow, which thankfully she manages to dodge. Larentia is unable to mount on this turn due to starting on that building tile, which she cannot wait on while mounted, but she is capable of one-hit KOing the enemy pickpocket and clearing the way for Faramir to move up to the boss. And since Leon is so fragile, I'm going to have Faye move in to body block for him. She is able to kill the only one of these enemy brigands that would be able to reach him if she is in the way. And that is sufficient to keep him from death for the remainder of the map. Thaddy is moving up towards the boss and he gets a critical hit against this guy, but that's completely unnecessary because Faramir is going to move up and finish him off, and Faramir would easily be able to kill that guy in a single round. Faramir is waiting next to the boss, which is actually really dangerous. I did not realize it at the time, but Faramir is low enough on HP after being attacked that he would actually be one-hit KO'd if the boss managed to hit him. So that's a risk I didn't even realize I was taking. Sylvis, meanwhile, is using arrows in kind of a weird way. She should have used a stronger arrow to get this kill, and later on she's actually going to use a stronger arrow when I could have gotten a kill with a weaker arrow, which is very silly. Anyway, Leon escaped, and Faramir is now fighting the boss, Fortunately, he manages to dodge the boss's hit, but he also whiffs one of his own hits, and that means that we still need at least 2 units to attack the boss in order to finish him off. Meanwhile, good old Dean is continuing his streak of getting unfortunate misses, preventing him from picking up kills, so big thanks to the RNG there. Laurentia is going to go in and chip the boss at this point. She is fairly comfortable fighting him because she's not one-hit KO'd, and of course Euthyphro is going to deal a significant amount of damage here, but it's not going to quite finish off the boss, and she is going to be countered no matter what because the boss has the counter skill, so the only way she would get away from damage there is if she'd managed to dodge. Looking at this now, I feel like my action order is all over the place here, because I keep bouncing back and forth between the scrub squad down the bottom and the boss squad. And here we see what I mentioned before, Silvus using a bronze arrow to finish off this enemy with 4 HP, who would have died just as readily to a stone arrow. So yeah, good job wasting arrows there, me. Anyway, Volo is going to be the one to finish off the enemy boss because Faramir is at low HP and Volo wants to experience more. For some reason I decided not to deathmatch there, even though that would have been much more reliable, but it worked out in the end, so that's all good. Thaddy is now free to move on to that building and to get his little event that he needs to do, and meanwhile the rest of my units are now free to start escaping. Faramir takes the lead on this because there's nothing else for him to do on the map. Now, according to Serena's Forest, it is possible to complete this map by seizing with Thaddy and then routing the enemy rather than having everyone escape. And that would in theory make it possible to complete this map in 7 turns. I was unaware of this while I was doing this run, and indeed up until I was already deep into practice for the next chapter, and that's because the game doesn't tell you that route is an alternative. And to be completely honest, it would have been really painful. If you've seen some of my Champions of Utena run, you probably know that route optimization is not really my thing, and doing it in this game in particular probably would have been a major pain in the ass. Although I think it would still have been possible with strong units like Sherpa and Clifford dealing with the Imperial troops. Anyway, it's now turn 8, so my units are free to escape, and the last one out is Faye, and that completes this chapter in 8 turns. Thanks for watching, I will see you next time.